And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. This is Jovan, and you already know I'm joined by my guys Harrison and Keaton. We're back again, fellas, talking about fantasy football. Looking forward to Week 7. We got another set of teams on the bye week. Last week in Week 6, who do we have on bye week? We had the Raiders, we had the Texans, we had the Titans, and I know I'm missing like one more team that was on a bye week that I can't think of who it was.
It was somebody we didn't miss all that much. Can we actually like trade? Can we do them again? Can they just have another bye week this week instead of the teams we have this week, please?
Right. That's what I'm saying. If I'm not getting this last one, then they must not have been that important. But we're going to talk about the teams that are on bye this week because I feel like they're just a little bit more important to the fantasy football picture here. But before we do that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. And you're also checking out totalsportslive.com. Also, make sure you check out the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, lastly on Anchor.fm. Just search Total Sports Live TSL Podcast. Same thing on Spotify. Just search Total Sports Live TSL Podcast. Really appreciate everybody that tunes in and listens and that hits and gives us a review. We really appreciate it. Go over there, give us a review. Download the podcast. You can do it on Spotify. You can do it on Apple. Appreciate it in advance. So, fellas.
It's the Detroit Lions. How did we forget about that one? No, we need them this week.
I think we forgot about them because they got blown out the last time.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson, 161 rushing yards. Yeah. It was the Bailey Zappi.
They got zappied.
Good old Detroit. Like we said, we actually need them this week in fantasy.
Yes,
so fellas, before we jump in, how's everybody doing, and how did your fantasy teams manage and handle Week 6? Because like I said, we had four different teams on the bye, a lot of big time players: Devontae, Josh Jacobs, Damian Pierce, Brandon Cooks, Jamal Williams, TJ Hawkinson, Hawk Daddy, Amon Ra. Yeah, it's a lot of guys that were out. But how did your teams fare through the first set of bye weeks?
Not bad. I guess I think I had mixed results, over all of our leagues. The one thing that I noticed though, scoring was way down. In our league, Jovan, there's a high scoring winner. So we keep track of it's very easy to keep track of who's scoring and how much they're scoring. Scoring across the entire league was down, the entire league. So it's just tougher to play fantasy football this year. I know we'll open up a little bit about that in just a second. Just strategy-wise with the bye weeks, it's going to be even more difficult. I mean, that's just typically how it is every year, but I think especially this year because in the first 6 weeks we haven't had as many fantasy breakouts. We haven't had as many high-scoring games in the first 6 weeks. It just only squeezes, the job that we have to do as fantasy managers in this week. So it was tough for me, but it was also tough for everyone else. So I guess I didn't feel like I was too far behind the 8 ball, but fantasy football is a hard game right now.
Man, I'll second that. Scoring was down across all the leagues. I'm nosy. I like to look at my friends' teams, see what they're doing, see who's scoring. It really was down. I feel like in our TSL league, I think I won my game 62-60. You know what I mean? Like it's Keaton said it. It's been a weird year for fantasy football. It's been an unpredictable year. It's hard to really know what you're going to get each week. A lot of random guys will pop off for a 25-point game one week, 2-point game the next week. A lot of stars have been inconsistent. So there's a lot to break down on this Week 7 preview for sure.
I wonder if it has anything to do. Like, there are so many coaches now that I think are hyper aware of like fantasy football, and I almost feel like some are trolling. In a sense,
Arthur
just
Smith.
Like, look, I'm not going to Arthur Smith in Atlanta. Like, I mean, he's like coming out and telling you, like, I don't care about your fantasy football team, and you almost feel like, but I don't know if there's like some sort of hyper awareness about fantasy nowadays. It's such a huge industry. It's so much more than just a game. I mean, it's permeated everything, and so I wonder if that does have an effect. If coaches are looking at lines, and organizations are considering what the odds are of certain things happening, and maybe working that into their strategy. Data is everywhere now, so it's been a weird year for us. That also means it's been a weird year in the NFL for, what their metrics and what their numbers look like too.
And we know NFL teams are looking at everything. They're finding data in all different places. So that's a great point.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like you said, like you guys said, it's definitely been a weird year so thus far because, like we said, with just based off of injuries, you just don't know who's going to pop up and who's going to show up and actually have like that surprising big game, right? Like Taysom Hill having 112 yards against the Seahawks. Like nobody saw it. He scored like what 30 something
34.
fancy points, something like ridiculous like that. And then we just look at last week with a guy like Deion Jackson, and what he did. He's now rostered, just looking at just in NFL.com leagues. He's only rostered 17.9% of leagues, but did everything that you wanted out of a RB1 with 12 carries, 42-yard rushing touchdown, but 10 targets on 10 receptions for 100 yards. Like incredible. And if you had him, he probably gave you between 15 and 20 points in a pinch.
He probably won you your week. If you weren't expecting, if you had Jonathan Taylor, maybe you grabbed him, something like that. But I mean, think about what Deion Jackson's value is this week, with Jonathan Taylor supposed to be. Well, I guess he's supposed to be coming back this week, so you can't even rely on that.
No.
It's just been so weird. Running back has been especially decimated, and then this week we've got Miles Sanders off the board. This week we've got, who else do we have? Dalvin Cook off the board.
Yeah,
we have the Rams running backs off the board. That's probably doing them a favor, but you've got some serious running backs off the board. Even Devin Singletary, who's been effective this year. So now we're down possibly 3 or 4 potentially usable running backs out of that group. So it's going to get weird this week. You might have to take another flyer and look deep into the situation of who's going to be able to get carries within a role, more so than who's the big name or, who's the guy that I can trade for to kind of make up for the gaps that I have. That might be a little bit extreme a move in a season like this where just numbers are just super wonky and weird.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that leads us into our first conversation on the pod this week. And that is how should fantasy managers go about managing bye weeks and injuries? Because like you said, the teams that we have on bye this week, they're not the Texans and the Raiders and, the Lions. No disrespect to those teams because they have talent. We're talking about the Eagles with Hurts and Sanders and Goddard and Brown. And Devontae and the Smith, Bills with Allen and Knox and Diggs and Davis and the Rams, even though they're not playing well, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee, Matthew Stafford, Darrell Henderson Jr., then the Vikings, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Irv Smith, Kirk Cousins. Like a lot of talented players are off the board, fella. So I guess we're almost giving people advice on how should they approach the bye week. I don't think we have really no significant injuries to worry about this week that I know off the top of my head. Keenan Allen looks like he will play. Bateman, we're not sure if he's going to play. Pretty much the Saints wide receivers are out. I think we all kind of knew that and had figured that out. Outside of Olave, he's the only one playing. But really no significant injuries this week that we know of. Of guys that are out, DeAndre Swift, I think he's questionable. I think he did practice after recording this podcast. But how should managers go about trying to figure out how to navigate the bye week? Because it's not as easy as one, could think.
This is a week I'm hoping to have some homegrown guys. This is a week I'm hoping to have some guys on the bench, some guys that you've been kind of waiting on, hoping to see if they can take that next step. Maybe a guy like Romeo Doubs out in Green Bay, a guy like George Pickens in Pittsburgh. We've seen Kenneth Walker really step into a new role in Seattle. Some guys of that nature. Maybe you've been stashing Michael Gallup, waiting for Dak to come back. Maybe this is his week to come back. That's kind of one thing I've really looked at on my teams and just some of the other teams in my league, kind of looking at how they're going to address some of the buys. Because, some of these lineups have 3 or 4 guys out. And you also have Marquise Brown going on season-ending injury. That hurt a lot of teams. Russ is questionable this week. Not sure if he's going to play. That's been a problem anyway if you have Russ as your quarterback. But, that's a lot of team starters. So there's a lot of, fantasy is very fluid this year. I feel like managers have to be flexible and kind of ready to maybe start Devin Duvernay one week in your flex. You know what I mean? Like you got to get creative and think outside the box. Try to just find productivity where it is. We were kind of talking about Jackson in the running back room. I think about the weeks where Alexander Madison, not really this year, but in the past, where Alexander Madison has went out and got 20 points. Chuba Hubbard was a legit starter last year. This year, he hasn't had one fantasy relevant game. He's rostered in probably like 1% of leagues. So I'm just kind of thinking of things like that. Dontrell Hillard, week 1 with his 25-point game. Where can you find 25 points, especially on a week like this where there's so many guys that are out? Where can you kind of find 15 points? Where can you find 10 points? Where can you find somebody to kind of be productive? If you have to look at the waivers, we're going to get into our waiver wire segment. You can kind of find some guys there, but it's been a tough year on waivers in general. So this is a week where if you have a lot of buys, I'm hoping you have some homegrown guys, some guys you've been watching, waiting on. This could be their week where you got to give them that shot.
I think I think it's all about matchups. I think this is like when we get in the bye weeks, like you said, if you got guys on the bench that you just been stashing and waiting to play, like I think you just got to trust the matchup and just like, you know what? You got to let it play out. Like if the matchup's good, then you just roll it. Like you said, if you got Romeo Dobbs, you think about that Commander secondary is not great. In any other regular circumstance, if we wasn't in a bye week situation, you might not play. But at this point in time, if the matchup is favorable, and I think that's what we all have to do as fantasy managers, and I'm even speaking to myself on that. Like you got to take risk and say, like, you know what, this matchup might not be good, but I ain't got nothing to lose, and it's probably better than anything that I can trust on the waiver wire right now.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to send it in this particular one. And I'm not talking about the trades. Like, don't trade your players. We alluded to it a little bit earlier this week, but I just don't think that this is an environment that's very conducive to to making good trades. You're probably going to give up or give out too much value or you're not receiving back enough value because the stock on players is going up and down so volatilely, if you will, that trades really, there's not a whole lot of trades that make sense on the board right now. So, going back a little bit to what Harrison said, think about situations. Last week we saw Deion Jackson step into Jonathan Taylor's situation. And that was a good combination of things. Tyler Heineke right now is stepping into Carson Wentz's situation this week. None of those things sound good, Carson Wentz or his situation. But when you think about how much that offense has to throw the ball because their defense hasn't played great this season, that's a situation now that Taylor Heineke can now step into and be successful. If you're looking for a quarterback this week, to stream maybe just this week, that's what you're looking for. So guys that have previously or that are filling big time roles more so than replacing big time players or definitely matchups are a big thing, but you really have to think about what role players are playing in right now with the versatility in the NFL, the real life NFL. And again, thinking about how they're going to win games, I think coaches are going to put players in a position where they are best. And I saw, I heard this on another podcast a couple of weeks ago when talking about how, coaches will shuffle around their players and things like that. If you have like a wide receiver 1 and then a wide receiver 2, and then the wide receiver 1 gets hurt, it's not like the wide receiver 2 automatically just moves over to the wide receiver 1. Sometimes there's specific players that are made for that role of wide receiver 1 on a team. So certainly paying attention to those kinds of things like, okay, my guy's hurt, or maybe the guy that I'm starting is replacing a guy that's hurt. Well, what role did that guy play? That's maybe a better indicator as to how well they're going to do in a given week rather than maybe just looking purely at projections or, just kind of taking a random flyer on a guy.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because when you were talking about that, it reminded me of just the situation that we saw just this past week where the Saints did not have Michael Thomas, no Jarvis Landry, no Chris Olave. So everybody's thinking those 3 guys are out. If you have Kamara, you're great. You can pick up Taysom Hill because, he just finds a way to score a touchdown. But you're like, need a wide receiver. So everybody's line of thinking, even in the betting community, your line of thinking is, all right, this is going to be a Marquez Callaway week. Like, he's the next man up, the next guy up. Callaway doesn't do anything. But then we have Traquan Smith that nobody talked about scores a touchdown. Like, so I think that's like the perfect example of what you're saying.
He stepped
like,
into Michael Smith's. Michael Thomas's role. Yeah,
right. And he wasn't even the next guy up. Really, It was everybody thought it was going to be Marquez Callaway to step into that role. No, it was actually Traquan Smith, and like I think that's like just the perfect example of that because again, like you can't, and it's so hard for us. You can't just go and be like, yeah, such and such hurt, so he's destined going to be like tight end one in the offense. Maybe it's like, for example, the Steelers, like Pat Fryermuth get hurt, you're like, Zach Gentry is going to be tight end number one. But then you really think about it and use your football mind, you're like,
Zach Gentry's a blocking tight end. He's
right.
not going to be running routes like Fryermuth is.
Right. The Steelers will go four wide receiver
Cam Hayward's
sets.
brother, and now he's a receiving tight end. He's going to step into that role, and you saw him get all the passing work there. But that's what you got to do. Like in bye weeks, you have to get creative like that. You're not going to have all your knockout, lock it in, for sure starters that are available to you. So in that case, if you're trying to maximize how many points you're getting out of a lineup, maximize the role that guy, or get guys rather that have maximized roles, best. That's my 2 cents on it.
No, it's definitely the right way to approach it. And we mentioned waiver wire, so let's talk about that and get right to that section of the podcast. Best case waiver wire options for week 7. Like we said, there's a lot of teams that are missing. There are a lot of fantasy teams that are missing a lot of talented players at the skill position, quarterback, wide receiver, running back. It's not great because as we look at the waiver wire across all your leagues, you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, do I really want to reach on Daniel Bellinger this week? Do I feel confident starting Mike Boone, even though Nathaniel Hackett said that Melvin Gordon is going to start, but somehow, some way, Latavius Murray ended up with the most carries and rushing yards on Monday Night Football. It's a weird week, but I think we have some guys that can kind of guide you through, not only season long, but also potentially DFS as well. Because obviously DFS takes a hit too when you don't have Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, who have probably been one of the 2 better quarterbacks, even Kirk Cousins in DFS. A lot of missing players on DFS and in season long. So starting with you, Harrison, who are just some of the guys that people need to go, check out on the waiver wire this week?
Well, let's start out with quarterback. We were talking about quarterback right there. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of guys out this week. Russell Wilson might be out as well. There's just a lot of moving pieces at quarterback. We're seeing a lot of different, if you're in a 12-team league, there's going to be some different quarterbacks than you would have expected. All right, in the beginning of the year and the starters, I can promise you that. I got 2 in particular I'm looking at. Keaton mentioned him earlier. Taylor Heineke stepping back into the starting lineup in Washington. He was a fantasy-relevant quarterback last year, 100%. He was a guy who, at his best, could get you 30 points. At his worst, he's going to get in that 15-point range. I like his floor. I kind of like where, kind of the situation he's stepping into. Like he mentioned, he's stepping into, what Carson Wentz has been doing the past few weeks, and that's been throwing the ball a lot. Outside of really the Chicago and Philly game, Wentz was a decent fantasy quarterback. People were talking about him as, a quality starting guy. I think Heineke has more upside, on the ground as a runner in the red zone. I think he's going to do some different things. So I think that's certainly a situation where if you need a quarterback this week, you can feel relatively comfortable going with him. I'm also going to go ahead and look at Matt Ryan, who really impressed me last week. And like we were talking about, like Keaton really mentioned with, what's the role of the player we're talking about? Matt Ryan's throwing the ball like 60 times a game. They are throwing the ball all the time. Listen, Jonathan Taylor's out. I get it. In general, though, they have thrown the ball a lot this year. They trust Matt Ryan a lot. They might trust Matt Ryan the most out of any of the quarterbacks, post Andrew Luck in Indy. They trust him a lot. It's why Alec Pierce has become a fantasy relevant receiver. Jelani Woods has put up a few crazy games where he's scored a lot of touchdowns. Michael Pittman is obviously a starting fantasy receiver. So I like those 2 quarterbacks there. Quickly, I'll just mention, shout out to the XFL. You got 2 XFL starting quarterbacks now with PJ Walker and Taylor Heineke, definitely getting ready for the spring football season. PJ Walker probably not a starter yet, but Temple guy, always gonna root for him. And maybe if you're in a crazy two quarterback league, give PJ Walker a look. And then just quickly, I like Wan'Dale Robinson as kind of one of my stash guys this week. I talked about Isaiah Pacheco last week. That's another stash guy. I think Wan'Dale Robinson probably has a little bit more immediate upside for people. This is a guy who they drafted in the second round. The Giants really like him, used in a lot of different ways at Kentucky. Missed four games really, most of this season so far due to a knee injury. But last week, 3 receptions on 4 targets, 37 yards and a touchdown. Giants have been a surprise this year. They're 5-1. Somebody's got to get the ball other than Saquon Barkley. Daniel Jones has got to throw the ball to somebody. It's not Kenny Galladay. Wan'Dale Robinson, handpicked by Brian Daboll and staff, really the only receiver on the Giants with that. So I think Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be catching people's eyes sooner rather than later.
Not bad selections, especially like you said, Matt Ryan. And I think a lot of people wanted him to be fantasy relevant earlier in the year, but it wasn't looking good because the offensive line wasn't blocking. He had that horrible game against the Jaguars where it was just like, oh my God, like he's imploding, he's regressing, like it's any adjective he wanted to come up with, right? He was all those things. But then, like you say, like he said, he throws the ball 58 times last week, almost reverting back to what we saw his last year in Atlanta, where he's just tossing the ball around. Right. So now he becomes fantasy relevant. And Wan'Dale's a very good option too, just because, again, that's another situation where somebody has to step up at wide receiver, right? Can he not, like I said, Galladay's a no-show. Kadarius Toney haven't really worked out well. So if you want to be real, the Giants' best wide receivers this season, outside of Saquon Barkley, has been David Sills and Richie James. That ain't great. I don't care what league you in. I don't care what team you have. That's not great. So Wan'Dale definitely has the opportunity to open up some eyes, and even Heineke, because that's a guy that's been in that offense for a very long time with some of the same players on that offense. So love the picks there, Harrison. What about you, Keaton? Who are some of the guys that you're looking at for the waiver wire this week that people can still snatch up and hopefully get some type of points out of the equation?
Yeah, get some type of points. That's been the theme of your tight end position if you don't own Kelsey or Mark Andrews in the last, 4 seasons, 4 or 5 seasons. It's been tough sledding in a week when you're also down a few quality tight ends in Dawson Knox, Dallas Goedert, Irv Smith Jr., I don't know. And definitely Higbee this year, who's been productive. So actually down at least 3, we'll say 3.5 really good tight ends this week, are really usable tight ends. So if you're looking at the tight end position right now, you're in a 12-team or 14-team league, and Mike Gesicki is still sitting there in the waiver wire because somebody dropped him because he scored like 2 points a couple of weeks ago or something like that. That person may or may not have been me in our league. But the point is, 2 things that he's got going for him this week. He scored 25 points or somewhere around there last week. He had an incredible game. We were talking about it before the show. He actually snagged 2 touchdowns away from those well-deserving wide receivers on the outside. But either way, Gesicki remains a physically athletic tight end that can catch passes up the middle, which brings me to my second point. The Steelers' defense has looked really good this season at certain points, and they've looked like the Steelers' secondary typically has for the last 4 or 5 seasons at other points, and that means that they give up a lot of yardage in the middle. It's like, the ghost of Troy Polamalu could play better defense than, what's going on inside the middle on the Steelers defense. Guys like Rob Gronkowski for years have torched them. Guys that can get open up the middle and be athletic, be big in the middle of the field. So I think that trend continues. What are they playing on Sunday night? So this Sunday night, Tua's coming back as well. It's going to be a primetime game. He's going to want to get the ball out quickly against the, even without Watt, a pretty quick Steelers front 7. So that's my guess, is that I think Gesicki will get a lot more opportunity than he has typically. He's already coming off a hot game, so I think he keeps that going. Go out in there, get you some Gesicki if you're looking for a tight end flyer this week, for sure.
Mike Gesicki, another good one, just because, again, we saw what he did last year, and even this year he hasn't been great, but he's had his moments.
I think this is the week. Well, he had his week. Actually, he had the week last week.
Yeah, and then he had the week earlier in the season against the Ravens in that miraculous comeback 42-38 win. That was just everybody was going off. It was just everybody. If you had anybody on that from either of those teams in fantasy, you was great. Minus the defenses. Minus the
Yeah,
defenses.
yeah, you were pretty down, pretty bad. Yeah.
You were down. You was down big bad. If you
Mm-hmm.
had those defenses. So I love the Gasecki, Wandell, Matt Ryan, Taylor Heineke, all great options that you can find out. And for me, just going to round it out here, Alec Pierce is my guy. Still, surprisingly, only rostered in 33.4% of
Crazy.
ESPN leagues. Does not make sense. The only thing I can make sense of is he plays for the Colts. That's the only reason why he's probably this low, because I pretty sure if he played on the Bills, or he was an Eagle, or he was a Ram, or he was a Viking, that number would be up there just slightly a little bit more than what it is. But he's been impressing me this season. Second round pick out of Cincinnati. When teams draft you in the second round as a wide receiver, they expect you to produce and do something. And he's been producing for this Colts offense that we knew coming into this season, right? They desperately needed a number 2 wide receiver next to Michael Pittman. You weren't going to trust Paris Campbell. T.Y. Hilton didn't come back. So you needed somebody to step up and be that guy. And Pierce has been that guy for him throughout the last 4 weeks. Last week, obviously, he scored his first career touchdown, game-winning touchdown against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Man coverage beat Shaquille Griffin man-to-man for the touchdown. Great throw by Matt Ryan. Didn't think he still had it in him in that pop gun arm, but he got it. He got it there. And you look at Pierce, and one thing that I like about Pierce, y'all, is that not only is he's getting the targets. He's getting the targets. Last week, 7 targets, but 3 receptions, 49 yards, a touchdown. Week 8 against the Broncos. Week 5 against the Broncos, 9 targets. Week 4 against Tennessee, 6 targets. Week 3 against KC, 5 targets. Again, he last week was his first game in standard leagues. If you had him, he only had 10 points. Not the greatest thing in the world, but you're looking for a wide receiver 3, depending on the league you're in. You're looking for that flex guy. He's somebody that I think you should keep an eye on, especially because who do the Colts play this week? The Titans. And he had a good game against the Titans, where he had 4 receptions for 80 yards, 8 points. And if you look at the Titans in fantasy, they haven't been great this year. They've given up 8 touchdowns to wide receivers and 30.8 points per game to wide receivers.
Yikes.
not just one wide receiver, just the team's wide receivers that they go against every week. So I think there's definitely a chance for him to exploit some things, especially if they get Jonathan Taylor back. We don't know if he's going to be back, but Michael Pittman will definitely get some coverage. So I think there could be room for Alec Pierce to eat. And then my last guy, this is again a stretch. We just mentioned tight ends. This is a guy that's another stretch just because he's been on and off, hot and cold. Evan Ingram, only rostered in 29.8% of leagues. Another guy like Pierce, who I like in DFS this week as well. Ingram, like I said, has been on and off, but he's been rather productive the last 3 weeks. The last couple of weeks, I think he's had a total of, I want to say 11 receptions. I think 11 receptions, but he's been another receiving option for Trevor Lawrence, which we kind of had to expect, just knowing how we know Doug Peterson's offenses run. They love to utilize the tight end to help that young quarterback. Running game has been very lackluster the past couple of weeks, but I'm still having hope for James Robinson and Travis Etienne to wake up.
Somebody.
Etienne had a few plays last week.
Yeah, he always gets the plays, but then he just somehow just messes it up in just the most wildest, craziest fashions. But Evan Ingram has been a guy that's shown up last 2 weeks against Indy last week. 5 catches for 40 yards, only 4 fantasy points in standard leagues. But week 5 against Houston, 6 receptions, 69 yards, 6.9. Again, you're getting with a guy like Evan Ingram. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet. He could be due for one. Who does he play this week? The Giants.
Revenge game.
This would be the perfect revenge game for him to score a touchdown. But again, Evan Ingram, unlike Mike Gesicki, Evan Ingram, you're not looking for him to score a touchdown. You're just looking for him to get volume, to get those receptions, right? Because if you're in PPR league and he's getting you 5 to 6 catches next week, you're going to be in excellent shape in PPR league. Standard, not so much, but PPR, you could be doing some business there. So those are the 2 guys that I like for my end of the waiver wire. So we gave you a great list. If you need to know what the list is again, Alec Pierce, Evan Ingram, Wandell Robinson of the Giants, Matt Ryan, Taylor Heineke, and Mike Gesicki. Those are the guys that you can still get on waivers right now as we're recording this podcast.
Right now.
Even when you listen to this later, you could probably still get these guys right now. So don't wait. Really, don't wait. Go get these guys like right now. Don't mess around, because you could end up losing out on a guy like how we saw last week, Deion Jackson, who a lot of people probably should have picked up, but they didn't. But before we wrap up and move on to our final segment, I do got to ask about one more guy that came to mind in the waiver wire section, and we talked about him before the show, and that is Marcus Mariota. Is Marcus Mariota a waiver wire option this week at quarterback? And I know the numbers have not been spectacular. They do not look great, but he's been consistently. I don't want to be disrespectful and say consistently mid, because that would be like real disrespectful to say that he's been consistently mid. But
there's a lot worse things you could be.
As
a quarterback, I think, right?
He could be Justin Fields, and I don't even like to slander my man Justin Fields, but
almost
Mariota has been very consistent from a fantasy perspective, fellas, and I don't think no one really expected that. I think everybody thought at this point in the season we're looking at Desmond Ridder, manning this Falcons offense. Mariota has held on to this job and done a solid job so far under Arthur Smith in his first year as the quarterback in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's extremely weird to try and gauge what kind of quarterback that Marcus Mariota is going to be. But isn't that kind of how he's been throughout his career, whether it's been for injury concerns or inconsistent play concerns? You've had moments where Mariota in the game seems like a perfectly reasonable solution to your quarterback issues that you may have. And if you look at that from a fantasy perspective, twice this season, he's gotten you the kind of numbers that you're pretty impressed with. Week 1, and then this most recent week in week 6, where he got you at or above 20 points. But is that what you expect? I don't know. I think it's maybe one of those situations where you don't look at the box score, or you don't look at the game, you just watch the box score as it goes up, because the football's probably not going to look good. But overall, in a year where quarterback play has been down, where Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, 3 quarterbacks that were almost cemented into the top 12, are all outside of that mark at this point, Marcus Mariota is quarterback 12 right now. In fantasy, the way you want to look at that. So gauge that how you will. If you have a 12-team league, if you're in a 12-team league rather, and most of those guys are taken up, within that, within that top half, if you will, or almost half of quarterbacks that are available, those guys are taken up, and you've got bye weeks to consider this week, and Marcus Mariota is still sitting there in your league, then you need to be on your phone right now adding this as you're listening, because not only is Marcus Mariota an option that would be viable, but I think that, this week, especially with 2 quarterbacks or maybe 3 quarterbacks down that you're potentially starting, Mariota may be a really decent option for you. And somebody's probably already snatched up Heineke too, so just consider that.
I think Mariota is definitely a fantasy relevant quarterback, and one thing that really catches my eye with him is just the volume that his running game has went up post Cordell Patterson's injury. Just the level that he's went. A couple weeks before Cordell Patterson went down, he only had 4 rushing yards, 3 rushing yards. Past 2 weeks without Patterson, 61 rushing yards and 50 rushing yards. Added a touchdown last week. That's really where you got a lot of his fantasy value from. And then also Kyle Pitts is back. And if Kyle Pitts can really get it going, that could add to Mariota's value as well. We've seen them have a connection at different points in the year. Hasn't fully clicked for Kyle Pitts, but we've seen some flashes of it. We've seen some of what that potential could be. So I definitely would feel comfortable going with Mariota, as your starting quarterback. If you have Hurts out this week or Josh Allen, he's definitely someone you can roll with as well.
I like it. I think you guys are convincing me to do something with Mariota. I don't know what I'm going to do with Mariota, but I'm going to do something with Marcus Mariota. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's something. It might be DFS, or it might be something embedded, because his number right now for rushing yards is over 34.5. So I might have to do it.
Yeah, it's an interesting
over 34.5. That's not bad. Yeah, three weeks this season, he's gone over that mark, over that mark. So
I might have to do it. I might have to lock that in after this show. After we finish recording, I might have to. Actually, that's going to be an official Total Sports Live play here. Marcus Mariota over 34.5 rushing yards. You heard it here first.
I like that play.
Lock it in.
Yeah, I like that play.
we talked out our reasoning. So
right.
It's there. If Caleb Smith and Tyler Algier don't do anything, we know one thing. Mariota's going to run that ball because that offensive line breaks down. He's getting out of Dodge quickly. He's not going to sit back there waiting to get smacked around.
Not at all.
He's not going to do that. So, hey, Marcus Mariota, only podcast where we talk about Geno Smith, Taylor Heineke.
Geno Smith is locked in now. I feel like Geno Smith is starting in most leagues I'm in. He's like a legit top 10, top 12 QB.
He's that dude now. Like nobody's not like
having a really good year.
Impressive year. And I don't think even talking about Mariota, but now Smith to a different extent. None of us could saw this year that he was gonna have. And just because everybody's like, no Russell Wilson, so this offense is really gonna be super pedestrian. And it's like, no, this offense actually looks better without Russell Wilson.
People thought Drew Lock was going to start. Think about. This summer, people thought Drew Lock was going to be the starter over Geno Smith. So definitely big
Drew Lock came and hit.
How the turntables!
Yeah, right.
And Drew Lock came and hit the barred side of a barn door.
Nope,
accuracy is horrible. But at least we got Drew Lock for the Young Jeezy meme. But that's about it.
That's right, legendary.
That's the only thing we know him.
The only thing you remember
for. That's not good. But this is the Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. It's Jovan, joined by Harrison and Keaton, breaking down fantasy football week 7. And let's wrap up the show here, fellas, talking about our favorite segment of the week, a tradition like any other in podcast history, and that is the Anytime Touchdown segment. Last week, we
need
told
some
you guys.
Here.
Yeah, I know, right? I gotta get a soundboard so we can add that in. Maybe like the Masters theme, like played in the background.
That'll be a good one right there. Just insert. Boop.
It'd be perfect. But no, last week, me and Keaton, we were holding down the podcast as Harrison was on the IL, but he's thankfully healthy and back. We had him listed as questionable to return. He did return back to the field to play, looking healthy.
Strong return, practiced all week.
Yes, practice all week with no issues, no setbacks, and he's here.
Not on the injury report this morning.
Not on the injury report. So we got him back. But last week we was like, we don't know what we're going to do for Anytime Touchdown because his books didn't have the numbers up. So he was like, all right, we just going to tweet them out, going to text everybody, see what everybody have. Surprisingly, our Mephitar Madness almost worked for the second week in a row. It almost worked.
Mm-hmm. Close.
We had Ramondre, right?
Ramondre Stevenson. That was mine. That's all I'm saying.
Ramondre Stevenson. Who was the other one?
Who was the run from last week?
Jamar Chase, right?
Jamar Chase. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Jamar Chase. And
then I had Tyreek
Hill.
Yeah, Tyreek is where we missed. That's on me.
Yeah. And the crazy part is,
hey, come on, Harrison. He wasn't thinking clear. He was out on the IL. That's what it was. He didn't have all the numbers right. Like,
no, listen. We can't even give Harrison the blame for that because it's different when Anytime Touchdown doesn't hit and the guy's like not getting like no type of production.
Come on,
receptions, 38 yards.
Come on.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill was eating against that secondary the whole time.
Like 12 for 177. Like my logic was there,
Yo, it's like, dude, like he should be like the one getting he should be getting rewarded for getting all these catches in these yards.
Yeah.
Like,
and what's crazy is part of it was I knew that you and Emery were both big Skylar Thompson guys in the pre-draft process, so I didn't fade Skylar Thompson. I was like, you know what, let's make something work here. And
he gave him his lights last week, certainly.
Skylar Thompson got hurt, and I have him on my fantasy league starting. That was sad to say, but don't worry, I'm still scouting out Skylar Thompson rookie cards as we speak.
There you go. Right,
I'm about to get that auto. Pay attention. Nice. About to hit up eBay for that auto.
Mm-hmm. Get it now while it's cheap.
Yeah, right. I think it was like $20. So
hey, for a quarterback, not bad.
Not that Bowman University.
We got to hit another sports card podcast. We did that during the COVID time. Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. That's a good one. We got to mark that down.
Right. That's a different pod.
That's a different pod, right?
Different pod for a different time.
So let's look at Anytime Touchdown picks, fellas. We got a couple of picks from each of us. Again, we advise you don't have to parlay these Johns. You can just run them singles. Obviously, if you parlay them, word of advice: don't go past 3 legs, because after you get past 3, things get a little bit murky, and you will get highly upset when that 4th one doesn't hit and everything else hits. So,
or that 17th one,
yeah, or that 17th one.
Yeah.
Even though my cousin, no lie, hit a 19-leg single game parlay last night for Sixers Celtics. No BS.
I mean, that's definitely not wise. We at the TSL Podcast, I can safely speak from my co-hosts on this, do not endorse 19 or 17 for that matter, leg parlays. So please don't.
3 or less, 3 or less, 3 or less. Or just do it what I always tell people. Just play them single. Play them single and just see how it all plays out. So, fellas, who are the picks this week that we're giving out to people? Again, these are picks. However, please make sure that you go line shop before you drop these picks in. What odds might be at one book, it will be different at another book. So make sure you line shop on these picks. So, fellas, who do we got? Starting with you, Harrison. Who should people be saying this guy's going to score a touchdown? You should play this one for week 7.
Yeah, like you said, we're before the odds, so not exactly sure, but I think this might be a decent one because he hasn't scored yet, and that's George Kittle. I'm really intrigued with that one. Taking on Kansas City. We saw Dawson Knox get in the end zone versus them last week. I feel like George Kittle's due, and I feel like San Francisco might have to throw the ball a lot in this game. I feel like this might be a game where Kansas City can kind of take advantage of them a little bit, get ahead of them. Let's see what Jimmy G can do. Let's see if he can get George Kittle the ball. I'm intrigued with that one. We talked about this pre-show. It just kind of gets to a point where you're like, well, he's due. When is someone going to be due? At some point, George Kittle's going to get in the end zone. Feels like, Shanahan, really good offensive mind. That might be something they're looking to do. That might be something they're looking to do. No more eyes are going to be on this game with them taking on Kansas City. So I'm intrigued by that. And then my second one is going to be Terry McLaurin. Again, we're before the odds, but I feel like people might be a little bit scared of Terry McLaurin this week with the quarterback change, with Washington's offense as a whole. The last time we saw Washington's offense against Chicago, it was, a terrible performance, very limited offensively. Taylor Heineke and Terry McLaurin had a perfectly fine relationship last year. Terry McLaurin was fantasy relevant. Terry McLaurin scored 5 touchdowns, all from Taylor Heineke, and had over 1,000 yards with him as his quarterback for 16 weeks. So they know each other. It's a quarterback change, but it's not out of the blue, who is this? They have a built-in relationship. I'm sure Terry McLaurin feels comfortable going into the game with Taylor Heineke. So those are my two. I think that, the odds should be relatively favorable. There's some factors with both guys, with Kittle not having scored and McLaurin taking on a new quarterback. But, there's some reason and logic, and, there's some ways you can convince yourself that those are decent plays.
I like it. I always like when we get some reason and logic for anytime touchdown picks. That don't involve numbers. It just involves just what's going on.
Sometimes
in the
you got to
field.
just watch the game.
Right.
Just
watch the game.
Eye in the sky doesn't lie.
There you go. What about you, Keaton? Who are the couple of guys that you think that people need to be playing this week for the anytime touchdowns?
I'm going to give you one, and this is purely that feeling that I have, that I just think that this is the right week for it to happen.
I mean, you've been hitting the last 2 weeks.
I got 2 in a row. I was about to say I got 2 in a row. 2 in a row. So I'm going to use that momentum, use that fire a little bit, hopefully on my side to carry me against the odds this week on Rondell Moore. That's right. You heard it here first. Hopefully you hear it in time before tomorrow to get it all set up for Thursday Night Football. Rondell Moore is plus 290 on FanDuel, right?
FanDuel.
You said plus 290 on FanDuel. So those are tremendous odds. The logic behind this, probably not much here, but DeAndre Hopkins returning from his suspension, first game of the year. I think he's going to have a huge game. I think he's going to command a huge amount of attention as well, leaving a very talented guy on the other end of the field by the name of Rondell Moore open and available. I think it's going to be a somewhat high-octane game, at least in the second half, I anticipate it will be, which means more opportunities to get into the end zone for the Cardinals. Give me some Rondell Moore this week, anytime touchdown. I know it seems the last couple of weeks I've Chubb and then Stevenson safe with the running backs. The wide receivers this year, though, it's been the year of the wide receivers, so I'm trying my hand in that. Give me some Rondell Moore at plus 290.
Rondell Moore at plus 290. I like that just because also he's been getting targets in that offense. No Hollywood. Someone has to step up. Nuke is back. But again, somebody don't need to step up on the opposite side. There, Saints defense, not great these last couple of weeks, getting lit up in the past game. Saints defense also giving up 7 touchdowns to wide receivers. So it looks like this could be a Rondell game with his speed and his size. He could find his way into the end zone. And for me, got 2. Alvin Kamara plus 115 on DraftKings. This is really simple. He hasn't scored yet. He's due. He's due. There's no Michael Thomas. There's no Jarvis Landry. Chris Olave's back. We know Taysom Hill will probably try to steal a touchdown here and there. But if you're the Saints, to set the tone right away on Thursday night, you got to get the ball to Alvin Kamara some way, some facet. What I like about this play is because the Cardinals are giving up the most receiving touchdowns to running backs this year, 3 this season. Alvin Kamara has had at least 6 catches in the last 2 games, so he's being used as a wide receiver. As a receiver out of the backfield. I think he finds a way to get to the end zone. There's no way we go into week 8 the next time we do this podcast and he has not scored. If Kittle and Kamara do not score this week, we are officially have a serious problem.
We're going to go take a trip to their OCs.
We officially have a problem in fantasy if that happens. If those 2 guys do not score, we officially have a problem. So I'm going Alvin Kamara there. And then last pick here, taking a flyer, taking a chance. Romeo Doubs staying in that Packers-Commanders game. It's more so the situation. It's a word that we used earlier, situation. More of a situational play here. No Randall Cobb. Alan Lazard's been a playmaker for that offense, and he probably will continue to be so. However, Romeo Doubs has that speed to take the top off the defense, and we've seen this Dallas defense can get stretched out. We saw what the Eagles are able to do against this Commanders defense, take them down the field. Even the Lions gave this Commanders defense some fits, and this Commanders defense has not been great. They've allowed 8 touchdowns to wide receivers this year, and Romeo Doubs is a guy that does not need volume to be successful. He has the speed where he can get one open and take it to the crib. So I like Romeo Doubs this week as well to score anytime touchdown. Those are the picks for anytime touchdowns. Kittle, McLaurin, Rondell Moore Thursday night, Alvin Kamara Thursday night, and Romeo Doubs. Those are the picks for this week. Make sure you go play those right now, especially for them Thursday night games. Get them in right now.
Can I get an honorable mention, Deshaun Jackson, if he gets burned? Maybe next week. Deshaun Jackson, but Deshaun Jackson soon. Get your Deshaun Jackson picks ready.
D-Jax.
Deshaun Jackson. I was actually thinking about that.
Yeah.
And let me see. He signed to the practice squad. I'm going to say this right now. I'm going out on a limb and saying this. If Deshaun Jackson is active for Sunday's game, he's scoring a touchdown.
I'm saying. I know.
He's good for one of those. He'll show up at somebody's squad and just score a touchdown.
That's what he does.
And then probably pull his hamstring right afterwards.
That's fine.
That's fine.
Right. He'll get that.
We got the bike. We got the bike on the sideline. Don't worry. Yeah. Right. We got good trainers. We'll take care of you. Just be ready for the playoffs.
There you go. So those are the picks, including Deshaun Jackson, for this week's pod, and that's going to wrap this one up. Again, appreciate everybody checking out the podcast and tuning in. Again, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're checking out TotalSportsLive.com. Make sure you're following the podcast on all the streaming platforms: Google, Apple, Spotify, Anchor.fm, probably a whole bunch of other podcasting platforms I don't know about that Anchor is connected to. You can find it there. It's the internet. You can find those things. Anything else, fellas, before we wrap up the pod and put a bow on this week 7, and then we'll be back again next week looking at week 8. More bye weeks will be upon us.
Yeah, no, another good one here on the TSL pod, man. If you're 2-4, 3-3, 1-5 even, fantasy season's not over. We're only at the halfway point right now. It's week 7, week 14 we finish it up. So keep setting those lineups. Don't start cutting your players yet. All right.
Yeah, don't cut your players because who else are you gonna get?
Literally, right. Literally.
There's nobody else. Hang on to your guys. Yeah, don't trade them. Don't cut them. Unless somebody throws something at you absolutely crazy, like almost to their detriment. Yeah, we're getting into that time of year where it's getting it's do or die time. Guys are looking at their team and saying, if I don't win this week, ... Like so desperation time certainly first week of bye weeks as well, but you can always make a run. So if your team is bad now, they could be great later. Other teams in your league could have the opposite effect, and it could play out for you well. By the time week 14 comes around. So stay in the game. Stay in the game, coach. Stay in the game.
Yes, stay in the game. Do not cut your players. Do not let other team people in your league eat off the wealth that you drafted. Don't let them do that.
Right.
And that's just not good league morale if that happens in your league.
Yeah, stay in the league, stay in the game. Make it fun for everybody.
There you go. That's all it is at the end of the day. It's all about having fun. So again, make sure you're following us on Twitter. The ticker's right there for anybody that's watching this on Spotify and YouTube. There's all the Twitters right there. Harrison at Harry Brown-Russo, Keaton at Keaton D. Nichols, me at Jovan 10. That's going to wrap up the pod this week. Everyone have a good one. Stay safe. Hopefully we'll see if the Phillies make it out of NLCS. Hopefully they do. Eagles are still 6-0. Flyers are above 500. Sixers. Yeah, there's Sixers. But we'll be back next week talking fantasy week 8 with a whole new set of teams on the bye week, and we'll check in to see how our fantasy teams are doing, and hopefully we continue to help you guys, with the advice and just making some money on the side with these touchdown picks. So for me, Harrison, and Keaton, everyone have a good one, and we'll see you all very soon.